the energy you think you're losing.
At some point in life, almost everyone notices a shift and mutters it aloud. I just don't have the energy I used to. It surfaces after climbing stairs, after a long workday, after staying awake long past midnight. It feels inevitable, almost universal. Youth burns brightly, relentlessly. Seemingly infinite age creeps in quietly, dimming the spark and slowing the pace. Yet the story we tell ourselves that energy somehow vanishes with time is profoundly misleading. Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, would immediately challenge such an assumption. He loved dismantling ordinary beliefs, probing the mechanics behind everyday phenomena, and stripping away the comforting but inaccurate narratives we construct about the world. If someone were to say, "I'm losing energy as I age," he would ask, "What do you mean by energy?" And in that question lies the first unsettling truth. Energy in the strict sense of physics is precise, measurable, undeniable, conserved. It is not stamina, motivation, enthusiasm, or drive, which are subjective experiences. The law of conservation of energy is absolute in a closed system. Energy cannot be destroyed. It only transforms from one form to another. Chemical energy becomes kinetic energy. Potential energy converts to heat. Mass transforms into radiation. At no point does energy disappear into nothing. This implies a staggering reality. The total energy contained in your body right now is not meaningfully less than it was at 18, at 20, or even at 30. Chemical energy remains in every molecule. ATP molecules continue to store and deliver energy. Thermal radiation still leaves your body. The physics has not changed. The discrepancy between perception and reality arises not from the disappearance of energy, but from the way it is deployed, organized, and channeled through increasingly complex systems. In youth, the human body functions as a highly efficient machine optimized for growth, adaptation, and repair. Hormonal surges drive rapid muscle synthesis. Neural circuitry forms quickly and flexibly. Mitochondria, tiny cellular engines, proliferate and operate at peak efficiency. Nutrients are converted into energy seamlessly. Recovery from exertion is rapid, sometimes nearly instantaneous on a human scale. The raw quantity of chemical energy may be the same as it will be later in life, but its orchestration and the efficiency of the systems using it are unparalleled in youth. Energy without organization is ineffective, like a pile of fuel with no engine to ignite it. Your body is the engine, the architecture, the transmission. Aging is not a sudden depletion of energy, but a gradual drift in the efficiency and coordination of that engine. Entropy, the measure of energy spread and unavailability, gradually infiltrates the system. In thermodynamics, entropy is not just disorder in the casual sense. It is a quantitative measure of how energy becomes less available to do useful work. A young body maintains remarkably low entropy through constant repair and adjustment. DNA is continuously scanned and corrected for errors. Proteins fold and refold with precision. Damaged cells are recycled efficiently. Waste products are removed. Inflammation is resolved rapidly. Tissues are repaired almost preemptively. With time, however, the maintenance machinery becomes less perfect. DNA repair mechanisms slow and accumulate errors. Protein folding becomes imperfect. Misfolded proteins linger or aggregate. Mitochondria mutate, replicate less efficiently, and some fail outright. Senescent cells, cells that cease to divide but refuse to die, accumulate in tissues, secreting inflammatory signals that disrupt local systems. Chronic, low-level inflammation begins to persist in a phenomenon known as inflammaging. Energy remains constant. It is chemical, quantifiable, abundant. What changes is the fraction of that energy consumed in maintenance rather than in outward action. The youth who could sprint, climb, and explore effortlessly is not fueled by more energy, but by more efficient deployment, more effective organization, faster recovery cycles, and more resilient molecular machinery. Basal metabolic rate, the energy expended at rest, does not collapse suddenly in midlife, contrary to popular belief. It declines gradually, subtly, and variably. The perception of lost energy is often an artifact of rising overhead costs. The body consumes more energy for cellular maintenance, repair, and immune surveillance, leaving slightly less immediately available for rapid exertion, novelty-seeking, or explosive output. Beyond the physical, energy manifests psychologically. Motivation, curiosity, emotional drive, and focus are expressions of energy in the human experience, yet they are shaped by neural dynamics, not fuel scarcity. Dopamine signaling, novelty response, and emotional prioritization evolve with age. Young brains are plastic, exploratory, reactive, driven to seek new stimuli and respond to challenge with vigor. Older brains become selective, efficient, concentrating effort on tasks that align with experience, goals, and accumulated knowledge. What feels like a decline is often a strategic realignment. Energy is redirected inward toward reflection, stability, precision, and meaningful output. Fatigue, lack of motivation, or reduced impulsivity is not a deficit of energy. It is a qualitative change in how energy is channeled. Energy that once supported indiscriminate action now sustains the maintenance of complex systems, both biological and psychological. Consider the analogy of a machine. Two engines burn the same quantity of fuel, but one has worn bearings and friction in its gears. Which engine feels weaker? Which engine delivers less usable power despite identical fuel consumption? The older human body is that worn engine. Energy remains, inefficiency rises. Recovery takes longer, not because the chemical potential is decreased, but because the microscopic friction within the system, the entropic drift, has increased. Aging is gradual, almost imperceptible, but constant. It is the subtle accumulation of small imperfections, the microscopic inefficiencies in every cell, every organ, every neural network. The dramatic decline perceived by many is not sudden. It is the cumulative effect of countless tiny disruptions, rising maintenance demands, and redistributed energy flows. Feynman's approach would have been relentless. Energy cannot vanish. The systems that channel it change. Efficiency is lost. Order is challenged by entropy. The unsettling truth is that aging is not depletion, but the increasing cost of maintaining the structures that allow life to function. You are not losing fuel. You are paying a higher price for order. The consequences experienced a slower recovery, fatigue, reduced capacity for novelty, less explosive output. The paradox is stark. Energy is constant, yet the perception of energy fades. You are not empty. You are increasingly taxed. What was once effortless becomes deliberate. What was once explosive becomes strategic. Aging is the rise of overhead, the invisible tax of time, the subtle accumulation of entropy within your own living machinery. The challenge is no longer simply to act, but to sustain, to repair, to organize, to allocate energy deliberately against the inevitable drift toward disorder. Youth is resilience, efficiency, rapid recovery, and a machine tuned for rapid output. Age is strategy, refined allocation, and careful investment in preservation. Energy never leaves. Only its deployment changes. Understanding this distinction is the first step toward mastering vitality across a lifetime, toward recognizing that the lost energy of age is neither theft nor disappearance, but the visible cost of maintaining life itself against relentless entropy, the microscopic friction of existence, the ceaseless battle of every cell to remain organized in a universe defined by laws that permit neither creation nor destruction, only transformation. Energy is constant, perception is not. Life is an intricate negotiation between raw potential and structural maintenance. The unsettling conclusion is that what you call fatigue, sluggishness, or diminishing vigor is not a lack of energy, but the rising price of order, the necessary expenditure required to resist the natural drift toward chaos, the cost of keeping a vast, complex, dynamic system functioning against the universal tide of entropy. Your body is not weaker, it is taxed. Your spark is not gone, it is rerouted, redirected, refined, repurposed. The energy remains waiting to be deployed strategically, and the challenge of later life is to recognize, allocate, and manage it deliberately. To sustain vitality is to understand this invisible law, to work with it rather than against it, to accept that youth was not magic but efficiency, and to realize that what feels like decline is not loss but a shift in the terms of engagement with the energy that has always been present within your own living machinery. The challenge is no longer simply to act, but to sustain, to repair, to organize, to allocate energy deliberately against the inevitable drift toward disorder. Youth is resilience, efficiency, rapid recovery, and a machine tuned for rapid output. Age is strategy, refined allocation, and careful investment in preservation. Energy never leaves, only its deployment changes. Understanding this distinction is the first step toward mastering vitality across a lifetime, toward recognizing that the lost energy of age is neither theft nor disappearance, but the visible cost of maintaining life itself against relentless entropy, the microscopic friction of existence, the ceaseless battle of every cell to remain organized in a universe defined by laws that permit neither creation nor destruction, only transformation. Energy is constant, perception is not. Life is an intricate negotiation between raw potential and structural maintenance. The unsettling conclusion is that what you call fatigue, the cellular battlefield. If part one unsettled you by revealing that energy does not vanish, but is increasingly taxed, part two dives into the microscopic engines that generate, distribute, and consume that energy, the cells themselves. Understanding aging requires shrinking beyond muscles, organs, and tissues into the trillions of cellular factories that convert chemical potential into the experience of life. Every heartbeat, every thought, every motion depends on these factories functioning efficiently. The central engines of this process are mitochondria, often described simply as the powerhouse of the cell, a cliché that cannot overstate their importance. Mitochondria convert nutrients into ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the molecular currency of energy, which powers every cellular process. In youth, mitochondria are abundant, highly efficient, rapidly replaced and optimized to supply energy with minimal waste. Cells can meet sudden demands without hesitation. Recovery from stress is almost instantaneous because the mitochondria operate with high fidelity, oxidative chains flow efficiently, and reactive byproducts are neutralized. With age, the landscape shifts. Mitochondrial DNA accumulates mutations. ATP production efficiency declines. Reactive oxygen species increase, damaging proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Damaged mitochondria are removed less effectively. The result is subtle energy leakage. Cells still produce ATP. The chemical potential remains, yet more energy is dissipated as heat or used to repair collateral molecular damage rather than to power motion, cognition, or growth. This is the essence of biological inefficiency. Energy is present but misallocated, and misallocation feels like fatigue. Beyond mitochondria, the aging body faces a rising maintenance cost on every scale. DNA suffers replication errors and oxidative damage. Repair enzymes decline in precision. Misfolded proteins accumulate. Lysosomal efficiency drops. Senescent cells, which no longer divide but refuse to die, persist in tissues, releasing inflammatory signals that disrupt their neighbors. This chronic low-level inflammation, termed inflammaging, consumes energy that could otherwise support movement, recovery, or cognitive output. Muscle mass experiences the silent shift of sarcopenia. Muscle fibers shrink gradually. Anabolic signaling pathways like mTOR and growth hormone response flatten. The same nutritional input produces smaller returns. Recovery from exertion extends over days rather than hours. Yet the chemical energy from food, oxygen, and ATP synthesis remains largely the same. What has changed is the translation of that energy into work. More is diverted into maintenance, repair, and stability, leaving less immediately available for explosive physical or mental output. Hormonal recalibration further reconfigures energy deployment. Testosterone, estrogen, growth hormone, insulin sensitivity, and cortisol rhythms evolve gradually. Peaks flatten, cycles lengthen, and signaling efficiency declines. Energy is not destroyed, the commands controlling its allocation have shifted. Sleep, recovery, and immune function change in response, reinforcing the perception of reduced energy even when raw chemical potential persists. Neurological energy follows a similar pattern. Neurons do not stop firing. Synapses do not cease transmitting. Action potentials continue to propagate. What changes is the network's flexibility and responsiveness. Plasticity decreases subtly. Dopamine release in response to novelty diminishes. Risk tolerance contracts. Emotional regulation strengthens. Focus narrows and attentional networks become more selective. Motivation and curiosity are rechanneled into areas aligned with experience and accumulated knowledge. What feels like a fading spark is a redirection of energy, emphasizing stability and precision over indiscriminate novelty seeking. The second law of thermodynamics, the law of increasing entropy, operates relentlessly at the molecular level. Every energy transfer generates some degree of unavailability. Even perfect chemical reactions are not 100% efficient. Young systems overcome this inefficiency through redundancy, repair, and rapid turnover. Aging systems face cumulative entropy within proteins, membranes, organelles, and cells, subtly increasing the fraction of energy required merely to maintain functional order. Mitochondrial inefficiency, protein misfolding, ion gradient instability, accumulated cellular debris, all these factors increase overhead energy spent on preservation rather than performance. Senescent cells act as local power drains. They consume resources, emit inflammatory molecules, and interfere with neighboring cells' efficiency. Energy is not stolen, it is rerouted and diluted in systemic friction. Recovery now requires more time because every stressor, exercise, illness, cognitive strain intersects with a system under rising entropic pressure. What once would have been trivial now carries visible cost. Consider the analogy of two identical engines. Both receive the same fuel input. One is pristine, the other has minor mechanical imperfections, worn gears, and micro-friction. Which engine feels weaker, which delivers less usable output? Aging human physiology mirrors this principle. Energy is constant, inefficiency increases. Microscopic friction grows, recovery slows, and perception misattributes the cause to a shortage of fuel. The subtlety of these changes explains why aging is often experienced as gradual rather than sudden. The systems fail not catastrophically but incrementally, imperceptibly, until cumulative friction manifests as fatigue, soreness, slower reflexes, diminished explosive power, or cognitive hesitation. Feynman would insist on precision. Energy does not vanish. Systems reorganize. Overhead rises. Entropy infiltrates. Aging is not depletion. It is the rising cost of maintaining order. Every molecule, every organelle, every tissue, every neural circuit operates against that cost. Every day, trillions of reactions occur, each subject to probability, each susceptible to drift. The microscopic inefficiencies accumulate, producing a macroscopic experience of diminished vigor, yet the underlying energy remains. Aging is the redistribution of energy, the shifting of allocation from motion, novelty, and growth toward maintenance, repair, and stabilization. It is the cost of resisting entropy within a complex system. Yet this insight is not fatalistic. Interventions can modulate efficiency and allocation. Exercise stimulates mitochondrial density and function. Strength training enhances muscle protein synthesis. Cognitive challenge maintains neuroplasticity. Sleep promotes repair, detoxification, and homeostasis. Anti-inflammatory lifestyle measures reduce chronic energy drain. Each intervention is a conscious strategy to redirect energy back toward meaningful output rather than overhead maintenance. Understanding aging at this cellular level reframes the perception of low energy. Fatigue is not a deficit of chemical potential. It is evidence of rising entropic tax and internal friction. The human body is not failing because energy is gone. It is increasingly taxed, because energy is needed to sustain the intricate structures that enable life. The paradox is profound. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, yet subjective vitality diminishes due to efficiency loss, entropic drift, and reallocation toward maintenance. Recovery takes longer, resilience is reduced, and the perception of dwindling energy emerges not from scarcity but from systemic cost. Aging is a battle against time and probability, fought at scales invisible to the naked eye. Mitochondrial DNA, misfolded proteins, senescent cells, declining hormone signaling, subtle neuroplasticity shifts. Each intervention that maintains order, each conscious choice to exercise, to challenge, to nourish, to rest, is an allocation of energy to resist drift and preserve functional vitality. Feynman's clarity reminds us that the unsettling truth is precise. Energy persists. The engines are taxed, the architecture is challenged, efficiency declines, overhead rises. Fatigue is the signal, not the depletion. The battle is ongoing, microscopic, relentless, cumulative. Understanding this reframes aging, not as loss of energy, not as surrender, but as a shift in cost, a reallocation of resources, a complex negotiation between chemical potential, cellular maintenance, and conscious choice. Aging is not emptiness. Aging is increasingly expensive order. Energy is constant. The challenge is management. The strategy determines vitality. The engines still run. You are not diminished. You are taxed. You are allocating energy in a higher cost environment. That is the cellular battlefield, the microscopic truth behind the subjective experience of aging, the quiet struggle that transforms chemical potential into the lived reality of perceived fatigue, recovery, and the reorganization of life's energy. Recognizing this allows a deliberate response through understanding, action, and maintenance. One can sustain vitality, redirect energy toward meaningful work, and resist the subtle entropy that continuously threatens efficiency. Energy is not stolen. It is rerouted and diluted in systemic friction. Recovery now requires more time because every stress or exercise, illness, cognitive strain intersects with a system under rising entropic pressure. What once would have been trivial now carries visible cost. Consider the analogy of two identical engines. Both receive the same fuel input. One is pristine, the other has minor mechanical imperfections, worn gears, and micro friction. Which engine feels weaker? Which delivers less usable output? Aging human physiology mirrors this principle. Energy is constant, inefficiency increases. Microscopic friction grows, recovery slows, and perception misattributes the cause to a shortage of fuel. The subtlety of these changes explains why aging is often experienced as gradual. Energy, identity, and the unsettling truth. Part 1 revealed the paradox. Energy does not vanish with age. It is constant, yet increasingly taxed. Part 2 explored the cellular battlefield, mitochondria, protein networks, hormones, neurons, and senescent cells, all demanding energy for maintenance rather than output. Part 3 confronts the human consequence. What does this constant yet reallocated energy mean for identity, vitality, and the perception of life as we age? Energy in the human body is no longer merely chemical. It is embodied, expressed, and consciously directed. In youth, energy manifests outwardly in exploration, spontaneity, physical exertion, and rapid cognitive engagement. Actions are executed with minimal apparent effort. Recovery is immediate, and the feedback loop between curiosity, movement, and reward is tight. With age, the underlying energy does not decline the way it flows, the pathways it follows, and the demands on it evolve. Energy is increasingly allocated to maintenance, repair, and preservation of complex systems. Every cell, every organelle, every neural circuit requires attention. The subtle inefficiencies and microscopic friction discussed in Part 2 compound to shift available energy toward sustaining order, leaving less for instantaneous output, impulsive action, or indiscriminate novelty seeking. This shift is experienced subjectively as fatigue, slower recovery, diminished stamina, or reduced spark. Yet the chemical potential remains. The ATP continues to circulate. The neurons still fire, and the mitochondria still produce energy. The human body is operating under a higher cost of living, not under a shortage of fuel. Conscious energy, motivation, and psychological vitality mirror these physical dynamics. Dopamine response, attention allocation, novelty-driven reward, and risk tolerance evolve. The young brain seeks exploration, stimulation, and immediate feedback. The mature brain reallocates focus to high-value, goal-aligned tasks, reflection, and strategic output. What feels like diminished motivation is often the result of selective energy deployment, prioritizing stability and meaningful action over indiscriminate output. The psychological component of energy, intertwined with biological realities, reframes fatigue and eat out. It is not depletion but reallocation. Aging is the negotiation between chemical energy, cellular overhead, and conscious choice. Each action, thought, or decision requires navigating the rising cost of maintaining structure. Recovery takes longer not because energy is absent, but because the body and mind are operating under higher maintenance demands. Muscle tissue, neural networks, and metabolic pathways all incur additional energy expenditure for repair, adaptation, and homeostasis. Hormonal shifts, flattening peaks, altered circadian rhythms, changes in cortisol and growth hormone further reconfigure energy distribution. Sleep, recovery, and immune function intersect with these changes, influencing perceived vitality. The human experience of diminished energy, therefore, is a signal of systemic cost rather than chemical scarcity. Aging is not collapse, it is increasingly expensive organization. The analogy of an engine remains apt. Two engines with identical fuel input will behave differently if one is worn, misaligned, or experiencing friction. The older human body continues to receive the same energy input but delivers output less explosively, less indiscriminately, and with greater energy diverted to overcoming internal inefficiencies. Yet this perspective is not fatalistic. Knowledge of these dynamics enables strategic intervention. Exercise maintains mitochondrial density, stimulates protein synthesis, preserves muscle mass, and enhances cardiovascular efficiency. Cognitive challenge preserves neuroplasticity and mental flexibility. Adequate sleep facilitates repair, detoxification, and homeostatic balance. Nutritional strategies mitigate oxidative stress and support hormonal stability. Stress management reduces chronic inflammation, lowering the energy cost of maintenance. Every intentional intervention is an allocation of energy to preserve function, counteracting entropic drift and redirecting potential toward meaningful output. The unsettling truth that energy remains but is increasingly taxed also contains profound liberation. Understanding the mechanisms behind perceived fatigue allows deliberate action, measured investment of effort, and strategic channeling of energy. What was once raw, indiscriminate youthful energy becomes mature, precise, and intentional energy. Aging in this light is not decline but refinement, not depletion but strategic redistribution. Identity, productivity, and perceived vitality are reframed. The human organism is not failing because energy is lost, it is adapting to a higher cost of order. The engines still operate, the fuel remains. What has changed is the architecture of allocation, the price of maintaining complex systems, and the distribution of effort between maintenance and output. Recognizing this allows deliberate prioritization, conscious management of time, and strategic use of physical, psychological, and emotional energy. The experience of aging fatigue, slower recovery, reduced impulsivity is not a deficit but a recalibration, a reallocation that preserves life and function in a high overhead environment. Feynman's insistence on precision illuminates the larger principle: energy never disappears. Entropy imposes cost. Maintenance consumes resources. Efficiency declines incrementally. Yet energy persists, accessible for meaningful work if applied strategically. Aging is not emptiness but increasingly expensive order. The human challenge is stewardship, managing energy consciously, preserving structure, and directing output where it is most effective. Energy itself is constant. Vitality is not a function of raw chemical potential alone, but of orchestration, allocation, and maintenance against inevitable entropy. Every deliberate choice, exercise, nutrition, sleep, cognitive engagement, Stress reduction at rest wave will be made. Message stem on that. The human challenges superior. Everyone fears find out. Well, you're mental input will behave differently if one is worn, misaligned, or experiencing friction. The older human body continues lost. It is adapting to a higher cost of order. The engine still operates. The fuel remains. What has changed is the architecture of allocation, the price of maintaining complex systems, and the distribution of effort between maintenance and output. Recognizing this allows deliberate prioritization, conscious management of time, and strategic use of physical, psychological, and emotional energy. The experience of aging fatigue, slower recovery, reduced impulsivity is not a deficit but a recalibration, a reallocation that preserves life and function in a high overhead environment. Feynman's insistence on precision illuminates the larger principle. Energy never disappears. Entropy imposes cost. Maintenance consumes resources. Efficiency declines incrementally. Yet energy persists, accessible for meaningful work if applied strategically. Aging is not emptiness but increasingly expensive order. The human challenge is stewardship, managing energy consciously, preserving structure, and directing output where it is most effective. Energy itself is constant. Vitality is not a function of raw chemical potential alone, but of orchestration, allocation, and maintenance against inevitable entropy. Every deliberate choice exercise, nutrition, sleep, cognitive engagement, stress reduction, is a recalibration, a reassertion of control over how energy is deployed. The paradox resolves itself in understanding energy is never lost. It is repurposed, rerouted, taxed, and constrained by systemic friction. Fatigue is not a signal of absence but of expenditure. Aging is not weakness, it is the rising cost of life's machinery, a continuous negotiation between chemical potential, cellular integrity, and conscious agency. Life becomes a strategic exercise in energy management, in sustaining order against drift, in channeling constant energy toward meaningful output. In this frame, perceived loss transforms into insight. The body is not depleted, it is operating under increasing systemic demands. The mind is not dull, it is reallocating attention, focus, and reward sensitivity toward prioritized tasks. Identity is not diminished, it is refined.